The galaxy was vast, filled with countless unknowns. Humans had explored many parts of it, conquering planets, making alliances, and boldly expanding their reach. But there were some places in the galaxy, some species, that humanity did not understand. They thought they could do anything, that no one could stand in their way. It all began with a single ship, a small reconnaissance vessel, sent to investigate a system known for its strange energy readings. The humans thought it was nothing. They didn't know the dangers it held. They thought it was just another uncharted system, an easy target for exploration. They didn't realize they were venturing into territory that had been untouched for millennia. And more importantly, they didn't realize that they had crossed a line. The ship was captained by a young officer, Captain James Morrow. He was ambitious and eager to make a name for himself, as many young officers were. The mission seemed like an easy one. Enter the system, scan the area, and return with valuable data. It was the kind of assignment that most people would overlook. But Morrow was different. He saw an opportunity. He ordered his crew to explore further than the mission brief had stated, to search for anything that might give them an edge over the competition in the ongoing race for resources. As the ship moved deeper into the system, strange signals began to echo through the ship's communication systems. At first it was only static, then a series of cryptic symbols. The crew tried to decipher it, but it made no sense. Captain Morrow, though, saw it as an opportunity. He ordered the crew to follow the signals, believing that they could uncover something no one else had discovered. He pushed forward, ignoring the warnings of his crew. They were just signals after all. Nothing to be worried about, or so he thought. What Morrow didn't know was that they weren't the first to receive those signals. For centuries, countless other ships and civilizations had encountered them, and none had returned. In the deep corners of the galaxy, hidden from most eyes, lay a species unlike any other. A species that had existed long before humanity even thought to venture into space. They were the Zalthor, an ancient race whose power extended far beyond anything the humans had ever seen. The Zalthor had been watching humanity for some time, waiting. The signals were not a call for help, but a warning, a test. And the humans had failed. When Captain Morrow's ship crossed into their territory, they knew immediately. The Zalthor did not take kindly to intruders. For days, nothing happened. The ship continued its exploration, unaware of the dark shadow creeping closer. The crew felt uneasy, but Captain Morrow dismissed their concerns. It wasn't until their sensors began to glitch that they realized something was wrong. The ship's communication systems failed, their weapon systems malfunctioned, and even their life support began to flicker. Panic began to set in, but Morrow was still determined. He believed it was just a malfunction, a technical glitch, and pushed on. Then, the signal came. It was a simple message, but it sent chills through the crew. It was not a communication they could understand, but the message was clear. You have awakened us. The message echoed through the ship's intercom, sending a wave of fear over every crew member. There was no time to react. The ship's systems failed completely, the lights dimming as the dark emptiness of space seemed to close in on them. Morrow tried to regain control, but it was too late. The Zalthor had already set their sights on them. A fleet, large and silent, emerged from the darkness of space, their ship shaped like something from another age, ancient, powerful, and deadly. The humans had no idea what they were up against. They thought they were invincible, but now they were trapped. The captain's heart raced. He ordered the crew to prepare for battle, but the ship had no chance. It was too slow, too weak. The Zalthor ships surrounded them, closing in like a net. Their weapons, unlike anything humanity had ever seen, charged up with an eerie glow. The crew was frozen in fear. They had no idea what would happen next. Captain Morrow stared out the bridge window, the darkness of space suddenly feeling colder than ever. A sense of helplessness washed over him. There was no escape. The humans had made a mistake they couldn't fix. They had provoked something far beyond their understanding. And now, the Zalthor were coming for them. The message was, Clear, humanity had made its mark, and the cost would be far greater than anyone could have imagined. The species they had awakened was ancient, ruthless, and had no intention of letting them go. In that moment, Captain Morrow realized the truth. There was no going back. They had awoken the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The Zalthor were coming, and humanity would soon learn the price of provoking them. The silence in space was deafening. For the crew aboard Captain Morrow's ship, it was the kind of silence that pressed in on their hearts, tightening around their chests. Nothing made sense anymore. The systems were down, the communication was blocked, and all they had left was the faint hum of failing engines and the soft echo of their breathing. In the vast emptiness of space, the ship felt so small, so fragile. The captain paced the bridge, his mind racing. His first instinct had been to fight, to somehow overpower whatever had come for them. But now, with every passing second, it was clear they were not dealing with a mere enemy. They were facing something ancient, something beyond their comprehension. The Zalthor were not just another species. They were predators, and humanity had wandered straight into their hunting grounds. Morrow's crew exchanged worried glances. Some had their hands on weapons, others were staring at the dimmed monitors in disbelief. No one knew what to do. The situation was growing increasingly desperate. The captain was the only one still holding on to hope, but even he was beginning to wonder if it was already too late. A sudden flash of light outside the ship's windows startled everyone. Morrow rushed to the front of the bridge, his breath catching as he looked out into the black void. The Zalthor ships had not fired a single shot, yet their presence was overwhelming. The ships loomed like giants, impossibly silent, their enormous forms barely visible against the backdrop of stars. But it wasn't the size of the fleet that frightened the crew. It was the feeling that the Zalthor could see them, could sense their every movement. It was as if the aliens were reading their thoughts. "Captain," one of the officers called, their voice trembling. "The signals. They're coming again. Louder this time." Morrow turned sharply, eyes wide. "What do you mean louder? We can hear them," the officer stammered. "Not with our ears, but in our minds. It's like they're speaking directly to us." The captain's heart skipped a beat. He felt it too. A strange, intrusive thought slipping into his mind. It was not like a voice, but a presence, a wave of energy that seemed to reach deep into the core of his being. His hands trembled as he gripped the railing in front of him. His own thoughts felt foreign, as if something was slowly invading them, twisting them. His crew was affected the same way. Everyone was starting to see things, hear things that weren't really there. It was the Zalthor, of that Morrow was certain. They were not just an enemy fleet. They were something far worse. They were manipulating their minds, causing confusion, fear, and a sense of helplessness. The captain could feel it in his bones. The power that the Zalthor wielded was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. "What do they want from us?" someone asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Morrow whispered, his voice hollow. "But they won't stop until they have everything we've got." Outside the ship, the Zalthor fleet moved closer. But rather than closing in for an immediate strike, they hovered, watching, waiting. Morrow couldn't shake the feeling that they were being toyed with. The Zalthor were testing them, pushing them to their limits, forcing them to feel the helplessness of being trapped in a corner with nowhere to go. The crew struggled to regain control of the ship's systems, but nothing responded. There was no communication, no weapons, no way to escape. Morrow felt a cold sweat running down his neck. Their ship, their most advanced vessel, was now nothing more than a helpless hunk of metal in a sea of darkness. And then came the second message. It wasn't spoken out loud, nor was it written. It came through their minds again, more powerful this time, like a jolt of electricity running through their bodies. A single chilling line echoed in their heads. "You will never escape." Words hit them like a blow. They were not just facing an enemy, they were facing something that existed beyond the physical world. The Zalthor didn't need to fire weapons or engage in battle. They had already won. The humans were trapped in their own minds, and they were slowly losing their grip on reality. The message continued, this time clearer than before, as if the aliens had unlocked a new level of communication. We are the hunters. You are the prey. Panic swept through the crew. The feeling of being watched intensified, and each crew member began to feel the crushing weight of the Zalthor's presence. It was like the air had grown thicker, harder to breathe, as if every breath was being measured, every move anticipated. Morrow's voice barely rose above a whisper. We've made a mistake. A terrible mistake. The first signs of the Zalthor attack were subtle. The power systems flickered, the ship groaned, and strange vibrations filled the air. Then, suddenly, everything went black. The bridge plunged into complete darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. Silence. And then, the sound of something massive, something ancient, moving outside. The Zalthor were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to claim their prey. As the lights slowly came back on, Morrow could only watch in disbelief as the ship's screens flashed with symbols and unknown languages. Languages that seemed to crawl across the screen, disturbing and alien. The Zalthor were here, and humanity was about to learn just how terrifying it was to provoke the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The ship was still, as if frozen in time. The darkness had passed, but it left behind a thick, suffocating atmosphere. The crew sat, in silence, staring at their monitors, struggling to make sense of the disarray they found themselves in. The systems had come back online, but everything felt wrong. The readings were off. The ship's once reliable systems now felt like they were sabotaged from within. The energy pulses that had previously been detected from the alien fleet had stopped, leaving only an eerie quiet in their wake. Captain Morrow stood at the front of the bridge, his back to the crew. His hands were clenched at his sides, his mind racing. He had always been confident, always believed that humanity could conquer any challenge. But this was different. The fear that gripped him was not born of the unknown. It was the very presence of the Zalthor. The ship's communication systems began to flicker again. But this time, it wasn't just a glitch. The screens showed something new, something terrifying. The familiar human language they had used to decode alien messages was suddenly filled with symbols, strange, twisting characters that didn't belong. Captain Morrow leaned closer to the screen, studying the symbols with narrowed eyes. They were alive, pulsating, almost breathing on the screen like a living organism. The crew watched in horror as the symbols began to shift, forming into shapes, into images of monstrous, shadowy figures, alien eyes watching them, endless and cold. And then, without warning, the words changed. You are not alone. The message sent a wave of terror through the crew. It wasn't just a warning. It was an invasion of their minds, an invasion they could not escape from. The Zalthor weren't just using their technology to attack. They were reaching into the deepest recesses of their thoughts, manipulating their very perceptions. Captain, whispered an officer, his voice shaky. What does it mean? What is happening? Morrow didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart raced and his body was frozen in place. He could feel something moving around him, like a presence. It was not a tangible thing, but it was there, wrapping itself around him, tightening, suffocating. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the bridge. It felt as though every crew member had fallen into a trance, their faces pale and wide-eyed. They were not looking at each other, not reacting to anything. They were staring at nothing. No one was moving, and that's when Morrow realized the horrifying truth. The Zalthor had already invaded their minds. They had begun to manipulate their thoughts, shaping their fears and desires into twisted, unrecognizable forms. It was not their ship they were trapped on anymore. It was a prison of their own minds. A cold chill ran down Morrow's spine as he turned his gaze to the nearest viewport. There, among the darkness of space, he saw something that made his heart stop. The Zalthor ships had disappeared, but their presence was still there. It was everywhere. Morrow could feel them, and they could feel him. The silent pressure, like a weight pressing down on his chest, was growing stronger with every second. The bridge lights flickered once more, casting deep shadows across the walls. That's when the crew began to hear it. The soft hum of a voice, low and haunting, echoing through the ship. It was not a sound, not a word. It was a feeling, an understanding that seeped into their minds, chilling their souls. It was a psychic whisper reverberating through the ship's hull inside their very minds. "We see you." It wasn't just one voice, it was many. And it was not coming from the aliens outside. It was coming from inside the ship, from the shadows, from the very air they breathed. It was everywhere. Morrow couldn't breathe. His chest tightened and his head spun. The walls of the bridge seemed to close in on him. He stumbled back, barely catching himself on the railing. He had to fight it, had to resist. He gritted his teeth, clenching his fists, trying to clear his mind, but it was impossible. The Zalthor were inside his head now, pulling at his thoughts, dragging him down into a void of endless terror. "Captain," someone shouted, but their voice was distorted, a whisper in the chaos. Morrow turned to see one of the crew members, standing at the door, their eyes wide with fear. Their hands were trembling, and they appeared to be holding their head, as if they were trying to block out the presence invading them. It was too late. The alien force had already taken root. We have to fight back," Morrow muttered, trying to steady his voice. "We have to do something." But the words barely left his lips before a new wave of psychic force slammed into him. His mind flooded with images, flooded with alien visions that made his stomach churn. He saw endless armies of Zalthor, their cold, emotionless faces, staring down at him. He saw planets destroyed, civilizations wiped out, and humanity, his people, crushed under the weight of their wrath. And then the final image, a single figure standing in front of him. It was an alien, one unlike any he had seen before. Its eyes were glowing, black as the void itself, and as it spoke, its voice was both alien and familiar. "You will never be free again." The words hit Morrow like a physical blow. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor. The presence was suffocating, all-encompassing. The Zalthor were not merely enemies. They were something more, something ancient and powerful, and they had claimed humanity as their prey. The last thing Morrow saw before his mind fell into darkness was the glowing eyes of the Zalthor, staring into his soul. The ship was a wreck. Systems were failing one by one, and the crew had descended into a state of confusion and panic. The Zalthor had not only disabled their technology, they had crippled their will to fight. Every thought felt alien. Every breath felt foreign. The crew was no longer in control of their own minds. It was as if their consciousness had become a battleground, with the Zalthor pulling at the very core of their beings. Captain Morrow barely recognized himself anymore. He wasn't sure if he was still the man who had commanded the ship, or if he was merely a puppet, strings pulled by the unseen hands of the Zalthor. The feeling of their presence never left. It clung to him like a shadow, whispering in his ear, tugging at his thoughts, pulling him deeper into the darkness. Every passing moment felt like an eternity. But in the midst of the chaos, something shifted. Deep inside Morrow there was a spark, tiny, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was the last shred of humanity, the last flicker of defiance that refused to be extinguished. The Zalthor were powerful. Their psychic abilities were unmatched, and their technological superiority made the human fleet look like toys. But the humans had something they didn't, something the Zalthor had never counted on. Hope. Morrow wasn't sure where it came from, but as he stood there, fighting the overwhelming pressure in his mind, he suddenly knew what he had to do. The crew had to fight back not with weapons, but with something far more powerful, their own strength of will. "We're not dead yet," Morrow whispered to himself, more to remind his fading mind than anyone else. But the words were a rallying cry, echoing in his head like the roar of a lion. They were still human. They could still fight. He turned to face his crew, most of them still in a dazed state, their eyes glazed over with fear. "Listen to me," he shouted, his voice shaking but full of defiance. "We're not done. We can't let them win. This is our ship, and we are still the masters of our fate. Fight with everything you have. We have one chance, one shot." A few of the crew members stirred, their eyes flickering with a brief spark of recognition. Morrow's words were like a jolt of electricity, breaking through the fog that had clouded their minds. Slowly, one by one, the crew began to gather, their senses rallying together, drawing on the last of their strength. But it was too late for the ship to fight back in any conventional way. The Zalthor were closing in, their ships surrounding them like predators circling their prey. Their weapons charged, ready to strike. Morrow knew that a direct confrontation would be suicide. They didn't stand a chance. But then, a thought came to him. A plan. It was dangerous, it was reckless, but it was their only hope. "The engines," Morrow barked. "We'll overload the engines. We'll turn the ship into a weapon." The crew hesitated, glancing at each other with confusion and fear. It was a desperate move, and they all knew it. Overloading the engines would destroy the ship. It was a one-way trip, but there was no other choice. They had to make sure the Zalthor knew that humanity would never go down without a fight. Morrow's voice cracked with determination. "We either do this or we die as prisoners of their will. We don't get to choose our fate, only how we face it." A few crew members stepped forward, their expressions hardening with resolve. Together, they began to work. It was the last hope, a mad, suicidal rush against the inevitable. They had no idea if it would work. But in that moment, it didn't matter. They were fighting for their survival, for their humanity. As the countdown to overload began, the ship trembled. The Zalthor fleet loomed larger in the viewport, their ships closing in, ready to strike. But Morrow felt something in his chest, a primal urge, a fire that hadn't burned for so long. The human spirit had been tested, pushed to the edge, but it was not broken. "Do it now," Morrow shouted. With the press of a button, the engines began to power up, the ship shaking violently as the systems began to overload. The hum of the engines grew louder, a deep vibrating sound that seemed to reverberate through the very core of the ship. The Zalthor ships moved into position, locking onto their prey, weapons charging. But just as they were about to fire, something unexpected happened. The human ship, its engines now reaching critical mass, shot forward with the power of 100 suns. The shockwave was blinding. The alien ships recoiled as the human ship broke free from the confines of its own destruction. It was no longer just a ship. It was a weapon. The entire vessel trembled as it surged forward, an unstoppable force. But even as the ship rocketed toward certain destruction, the Zalthor were not finished. They retaliated, their ships opening fire. But the human ship continued its charge, a final act of defiance. It collided with the first Zalthor ship, ripping through its hull with a catastrophic force. The shock waves rippled outward, sending the alien fleet into disarray. In those final moments, Morrow realized something. It wasn't just the ship fighting. It was humanity's will, its spirit that was taking the last stand. The Zalthor had underestimated them, thinking they could crush humanity easily. They had thought wrong. The human ship exploded in a blaze of light, taking down a dozen Zalthor ships with it. The destruction was overwhelming, and the entire fleet of the Zalthor staggered, caught off guard by the sheer ferocity of the human attack. In the midst of the chaos, the message was clear. Humanity might have lost this battle, but they had sent a message that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Never underestimate humanity. The explosion of the human ship sent ripples through the fabric of space, its final sacrifice echoing in the void. For a brief fleeting moment, the Zalthor fleet paused, as if in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the audacity of humanity's final act. The blast had been unexpected, a wild, destructive force that even they had not anticipated. But it wasn't enough. The Zalthor regrouped quickly, their ships forming a perfect, impenetrable circle around the remains of the human vessel. No further resistance came from the humans. The ship's destruction had taken with it the last of their hope, and with it, their strength. But as the fleet of the Zalthor hovered over the wreckage, something strange happened. There was no victory, celebration, no triumphal cry. The Zalthor were not gloating. They were watching. In the quiet aftermath of destruction, Captain Morrow's lifeless body floated in space, a final testament to his will to fight. His mind, though, was not yet at rest. His last moments had been spent clinging to the idea of humanity's resilience, but even he had known that their chances of survival had been slim. But as the Zalthor closed in, a final message surged through the dark, not from any system or technology, but from a voice that no one could identify, one that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You have proven yourselves worthy." The voice was deep, resonating in the very core of space itself, shaking the remnants of the ship's hull. It was an impossible thought, a concept that defied all logic. The Zalthor were not known for mercy, for understanding. They were conquerors, destroyers, masters of their territory. Why would they acknowledge humanity in this way? Why would they spare them? The voice continued, its tone shifting, almost impressed. "You failed. You lost. But you are not weak. The test is over." And then the unimaginable happened. The Zalthor ships, which had once seemed so formidable, began to retreat. Slowly at first, their vast forms sliding into the darkness, their weapons powered down. The crew that had been left aboard the remaining human ships saw it, the retreat, and with it the strange realization that they had been spared, at least for now. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, the reality of what had just happened sinking in like the coldest, sharpest dagger. The humans had lost, yes, their fleets were decimated, their leaders were gone, but they had not been wiped out entirely. In the aftermath, it became clear. The Zalthor had not only tested humanity, they had sought something in their response, something that went beyond military strength or sheer power. They wanted to see if humanity could endure. They wanted to see if humanity could fight back, even when all hope seemed lost. The battle wasn't about destruction. It was about proving whether the human spirit could survive when crushed under the weight of the universe itself. Humanity had passed the test, though at a tremendous cost. The surviving humans, those few left behind to pick up the pieces, watched as the Zalthor fleet vanished into the void. It wasn't the ending they had hoped for. It was far from it. The loss was immeasurable, the cost unbearable. But there was a strange, lingering hope. The Zalthor had recognized something in humanity they hadn't expected, a tenacity, a refusal to be broken no matter the odds. In the quiet that followed the Zalthor's retreat, one thought echoed through the minds of the survivors. Humanity would never be the same. They had survived the most terrifying species in the galaxy. They had faced oblivion and lived to see another day. But the price of provoking the Zalthor had been steep. The galaxy, once a place of infinite possibilities, was now forever changed. No one would ever forget the lesson learned that day. The cost of underestimating humanity was far greater than anyone could have imagined. And as the survivors looked toward the future, they knew one thing for certain: they had learned to survive against the impossible. And from this moment on, they would never again be the prey. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy, but the Zalthor would never forget who they had awakened. The reckoning was not over.